Welcome to Unscripted with Jeff Pedowitz. I sit down with remarkable people from very different worlds, security and science, business and medicine, technology and the arts, for honest conversations about AI and where it's taking us. No scripts, no talking points, just what they actually think. I'm Jeff Pedowitz. Let's get into it.
Everyone's suddenly debating whether we can trust AI to act on its own. My guest today has been answering that question for 25 years in places where getting it wrong actually kills someone. Dr. Jennifer Rochlis spent 2 decades at NASA, where she helped build Robonaut, a humanoid robot that's designed to work side by side with astronauts in the vacuum of space. She has a PhD from MIT. She wrote NASA's guide on integrating humans and machines, and she's since brought that to autonomous systems in defense. So, while the rest of us are figuring out whether to trust an AI agent with our inbox, she's actually spent a career on a much harder version of that question. When do you trust a machine with a life? That's where I wanted to go. Jennifer, welcome to Unscripted. Let's get into it.
Okay.
All right. So you've been doing this for a while, so I know you have a lot of convictions and some strongly held beliefs, but is there something about your field or one of those beliefs that you've actually changed recently?
Yeah, I love this question, Jeff, and thanks for having me too. I appreciate the invitation because this is a field that's very near and dear to my heart, as you know. The way I would approach this question is, early in my career, I think I spent a lot of time asking, how do we build the most efficient systems? How do we build the best capabilities? It was really about pushing the tech forward. And now I spend a lot more time challenging that belief, is that that's the most important thing to be doing. Really, I believe we need to be building very increasingly capable systems, but ones where they evolve together with the humans. And so capability, I think, turned out not to be the hard part. It's the relationship between the humans and the tech.
Which I suppose that's harder to pin down, right? I mean, it's evolving.
Yeah.
Part of it's cultural, part of it's psychological, part of it's the capability of the machine, expectations, governance, and where do you weigh in on that? How do you actually help improve the relationship between human and machine?
Well, one of the ways that this evolved for me was seeing how humans' interaction with machines as they got increasingly capable really changed the nature and the dynamics of the work itself. So early days when we were building humanoids, that was a totally new form factor. So the idea of housing automation and autonomy in a system that looked kind of like us came with it a whole bunch of expectations and beliefs around how we interact with people, right? We kind of anthropomorphize all of our tech, and especially when it looks like a person, that's easy to do. And so really the conversation started with, how are we seeing humans evolve with this tech and engage with it when it doesn't really understand what it's doing? And when you look at a humanoid, for example, you kind of understand at the fundamental level how it's supposed to move and what it does, right? And we sort of expect it to do certain things. When it's a system that is, in an LLM-based system where it's in my software platforms on my computer and it doesn't have a mechatronic component to it, I bring a completely different set of interaction and tools and guidelines with it. So what I started to understand was so much of it has to do with the expectation we humans as users are bringing to the table when we work with these systems. And watching that evolve as the tech did, I think, is where this really formed for me.
So, you were in NASA a long time, over 20 years, building systems where humans and machines have to trust each other or people do actually die. That particular area, given your doctorate and everything else, how did you end up on that area of specialization?
I actually found it because when I was at MIT for grad school, the department was called Aeronautics and Astronautics, but they had majors within that field. So you could specialize in thermal or propulsion or fluids. And the major they had at the time I was there was called Humans and Automation. And so that's what I spent my career learning about. So on the one hand, you're learning about computer systems, AI systems, automation, and all the scales of autonomy, and how when you write something like you're doing transfer functions and controls on paper, but you build the thing and it never works the same way it does on paper, right? And sort of that learning about what deployed systems really look like on that, I'll say, the technology side. And then on the human side, we had to understand, if you think about humans like a black box, right? Inputs, outputs. What happens when you take the human and put them into unusual environments like outer space or undersea or high gravitational environments or anything. So what does that change the nature of the interaction and the expectation of what the human's going to do with that technology when those environments change? And so deep space to me and space travel was one of the most challenging environments I could think of, and I was always passionate about doing it. So the challenge for me was really fascinating about how we really are pushing the boundaries of what we're expecting humans to do and tolerate out in deep space, and then also giving them the technology that's really going to help them do their job. And what does that look like? And that might be a different solution than on the ground. But it turns out the things that underlie all of that are just about the same, right? Humans are very messy, and thank goodness, because it'll always be an interesting problem to solve.
And so few of us, I mean, we see it in science fiction or we watch For All Mankind, right? That's our knowledge of, space and robots. But, a lot of the technology we work with are not robotic in nature that we see each day. So when you think about designing robots, particularly humanoid robots, and then you add that challenge of working next to an astronaut in space, what goes into the design thinking? How do you approach it?
Yeah. Well, first, we kind of reverse engineered the concept for it from the idea that, human time outside of a spacecraft and even in space is very, very precious. So what do we do to offload the cognitive burden and the time burden on the crew so we can get more done? And there are a lot of tasks that we have to do in and around the space stations and so on that are, we used to call them the triple Ds, dull, dirty, dangerous. I think everybody kind of is used to that phrase by now in the industry. But at that time, that was really the case, right? So can I send an astronaut out into the spacecraft? Sure, to do a spacewalk, but that's incredibly expensive, both from a time commitment and an expenditure of consumables. So if I could put an astronaut out there that was a robot, I could say, well, they can work 24/7 and they don't need to come in and they're just using power. And that I can actually work with. So we started from there. But because of that, the form factor really emerged because we already had a suite of tools and access capability channels and pathways that were all designed for humans. And so if you use the same human form factor, then you're already taking advantage. You don't have to redesign all of your interfaces. So today, I think the interesting cutting edge innovation about where we're putting this kind of advanced software and autonomy and AI into mechatronic systems is, what does the new fit for purpose model need to look like? And does it need to look like a humanoid or not? And you'll see, even robotic dogs on the battlefield are anthropomorphized and people treat them like team members. And there are a lot of countries doing more in-home care type of robotics. And do they need to look exactly like our standing humans? Usually they're smaller, they have different, interfaces or end effectors or so to speak. So I think really you kind of have to say, what is the goal here for this kind of partnership in terms of the technology and the human, and kind of let the design emerge from there.
So I guess that leads us into trust architecture, which is more of a popular phrase, I guess, and that aligns human behavior, system performance, and then overall intent, as you were just indicating. Mm-hmm. But in plain terms, like when you go to engineer something like that, how do you actually build trust between a human and a machine?
Yeah, it takes time, first of all, but it's totally doable. So what I first want people to appreciate is that trust is not a feeling. I believe we think of it often as a feeling. I feel like I can trust you or not. We're used to talking about it in those terms, but really trust is an emergent property. It is something that emerges from a system's behavior. And so what that means is that we want the system to be understandable, we want it to be legible, and we want our expectations of what it's doing to stay aligned over the time that we use it. And so because it's an emergent property, it means we can design for it and design around it. So trust definitely is not static. I mean, we know that from our human interactions, right? It's a very continual process. So it takes time to calibrate. So in the beginning, we have this calibration phase where we are learning about each other, what you do, what I do, what the robot does, what the AI does. And then as we interact more and more, that mental model of it evolves. So what has to happen is a couple things. First, the intent has to be clear on the side of the technology, right? What is the system intending to do? How is it designed? How is it showing that to me? And then I have an expectation that I bring to the interaction, whether that's made clear or not. I have one. And then are those two things coherent over time? And so if I see you as an AI agent or a robot, whatever, it's not that I don't ever expect you to fail. Of course, I'm going to expect failure. It's, are you failing in a way I can understand and then update my mental model around? And if I can't update my mental model around it, trust fails. If you are failing in a way that I don't understand and I can't get new information about what you're actually doing, the trust fails. And one of my favorite things about this framework is that you can replace AI with human and all of it holds, right? This is how human-human trust develops as well, which is kind of how we modeled the development of human and machine trust.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, the way that people are already interacting with machines and AI is very much how we interact with humans. Like, we take a long time to learn to trust each other, and then something simple can break that trust. You know, we do something wrong as a friend, a spouse cheats on another spouse, the trust is broken. And depending upon the strength of the relationship, communication, etc., you know, trust could be rebuilt or it may never. And we see this now with people, they have a bad experience with AI or technology, and they just refuse to use it. They retrench. So in a world, though, that's moving so fast, and if we become dependent or codependent even on these humanoids, what happens then? Like, you know, so the trust is broken. What do? You throw the humanoid out in the trash? Or like, how do you know?
Maybe we at least recycle some of the parts. Well, look, and this is where I think that we have to take responsibility for how we're designing these systems, right? Because what I think we have done traditionally is hold on to them for too long and let them out into the world when they're too mature. So we don't have time to build the calibration with that element when it's in the messy, nascent phase, right? And so I always am a proponent of releasing technology early and often, because one of the things that people really forget sometimes is that no matter how well you think you've designed something, as soon as you let it out into the world to be used by people, they're going to use it in ways you didn't expect. And then we're having to dial back and go, oops, didn't expect that. And look, I mean, I could point to a handful and many more of aviation accidents, space accidents, recent LLM tragedies that have happened, with the fact that we are trying to figure out what we feel and think about these, you know, these technologies, and what do we do when we've let it out of the bag and now it's doing something that we can't correct for. And oftentimes what I have seen put in place as corrective actions is either over-restrict it, shut it down, turn it off, pull the plug.
That's happened in NASA, almost. I mean, you know, we went from being very, you know, risk tolerant and pushing the envelope, and then the Challenger thing happened, and then we just sort of swung the pendulum the other way. Yeah,
absolutely, we did. And we've done that multiple times, right? And that's, you know, our risk tolerance is different depending on if you're a corporation or a government entity, right? At NASA, yes, there's court of public opinion like there is for the private companies, but there's also, we are a government agency and we're spending taxpayer dollars. I work for you when I'm a civil servant, right? So we need to really make sure that we're doing right. And what we see oftentimes is that if you look, you know, a lot of the human factors analysis of accidents and incidents is across the decades. We use this model called the Swiss cheese model of error. I love it. Means basically if you line up all the holes, you know, of all the layers of the cheese, like, and, you know, an accident happens, what that speaks to is that there are many, many layers of a company, of an agency, of employees where we have responsibility and insight and authority into how or whether accidents happen. And we need to be responsible for all of those layers. And I think that's where people are missing the point. Sometimes they think of the person who's just sitting at the code, you know, typing in and creating it, versus the people who maybe ideated it and created the requirements set and built a culture of whether or not it was okay to be late on a delivery if it was not perfectly, you know, qualified or certified, right? There's all these layers where there's influence on how we and build the tech and how it's released into the world. So we really have to pay attention to where all of our responsibility sits, I think.
So where is the demarcation point? You know, whether we trust machines too much or too little, we're trying to find that right, I guess, fulcrum, middle point where it's just right. How do you make that determination?
Yeah, it's definitely, there's problems with both, right? Overtrust, undertrust. We've seen this, the mistakes happen on both sides of that. So that's why I think that we need to really start deploying more early and often, and allow the iteration to happen when the stakes are lower. And really, it's a fit for purpose kind of question. It depends on the type of system, right? So if I'm talking about a chatbot versus something that I'm going to put in my spacecraft that's going to control my life support, those are very different paths to trust. Those are very different paths to certification. And, we need to make sure that we are not taking our eyes off the goal and what it is that we feel like we could live with if the outcome turned negative, right? So an example of this, I think, is it's an interesting one. You mentioned Challenger earlier. We had a lot of arguments at NASA in the last 15 years or so about manual control of the spacecraft. And what I mean by that is the astronauts really wanted to be able to control the spacecraft themselves, stay in the loop, right, on launch. Now, with the dynamics and the phases of flight, it's not always practical for humans to be able to control the spacecraft at the rate they would need to control it at. And so there are just portions of the launch where we just can't let them have control. They would either make it worse or it was just unnecessary. But there were phases later on where humans could potentially intervene and perhaps save the day. This came out of the learning that the crew were actually alive when the Challenger exploded, and the capsule, then went to the ground, and there was no way to intervene and try to pilot it in any sort of way. So part of the answer to your question to me is about whether or not we're okay morally and ethically with the outcomes of whatever decision we decide to make about trust or lack of trust. And what we were pushing back on, the engineering teams were saying, it's very expensive, it's very complicated to allow you to manually control this vehicle. I don't think you're going to be able to do it. And the crew said, yes, but at the end of the day, if you don't let me have some way to save this crew that is part of my team, right, we are going to feel not okay about flying. So we did the analysis, and out of the millions of scenarios, there were 11 where the crew could actually intervene and do something positively. And so they did not feel comfortable just trusting that it would be able to be, they were like, give me a pathway, right? And so that was a really interesting set of conversations that I think really showed us how much the humanity aspect of these systems is maybe going unheeded.
So 11 possibilities out of a million. It's like making me think of Doctor Strange and Avengers Endgame, right? Where there was like one possibility out of 14 million.
Absolutely.
So really, that's fascinating to me. Just with all the intricacies and complications, you would think that there would be more opportunities. I could completely see it from an astronaut's point of view, who they are putting their lives on the line. But the math and the science came down to 11. So after you went back and presented them with those 11, how did they react to that?
It was sort of there's no cost trade or ROI that makes financial or budgetary or schedule sense, right? This is something that is just a human kind of artifact, right? That says, I understand I can't make sense of this logically on paper, right? But this is what it means to be a human and fly in space. And you're asking us to risk our lives. And we're also asking you to trust us that we feel more comfortable being able to intervene and save our lives over the machines. So it was really about clearly communicating the stakes in that case. And so they did. They went ahead and allowed those 11 to be. We had to run certifications on all of those simulations, and thankfully, we've never needed it, but it's there if they need it. And that might be a decision that's changed in the future. As we go deeper and deeper into space with less and less ability to really impact the outcome in these very high dynamic phases of flight, for example, and we don't know what we don't know yet, so it's harder to build that in, right?
Sure.
And that uncertainty.
So shifting them back to more corporate, everyone's in this arms race now to deploy AI agents that can completely act on their own and run the business. So given your experience, what are they getting dangerously wrong about human and machine learning?
What everyone gets wrong, I think, is that they believe we should be able to trust the machines more than we trust humans, right? But most of us walk around not really fully trusting each other. So, we humans are the ones designing these AI systems. And if you can't trust the source, why are you going to trust the output? So I think we are looking to assume that these AI systems are somehow separate and apart from the humans that are actually building and designing and coding and certifying and testing these. And then they're not, right? AI completely reflects the people, the organizations, the incentives, the cultures that create it. And so if we ignore that, we're trusting the output while forgetting that source. And I'm suggesting that we put some really, fundamental design principles around how we develop this human system integration of the tech. So,
I mean, there's so much talk and emphasis about human in the loop. I do it myself, with my team. I want humans to be involved, but
yeah.
Just reflecting about your comment about the 11 scenarios out of millions. I mean, are we actually really taking this as some kind of security blanket, and that we'll just take it away as soon as the machine is good enough and humans are just too slow? Or is it really something that we essentially need to keep embedded?
Yeah. So what I would say is there are very well-worn processes to work through how we think about that question. Because you start with, say, what are my goals? What is the job I'm trying to do? What's the mission I'm trying to accomplish, right? And then you take a functional decomposition approach and you go, okay, what are all the functions that have to happen? What are all the tasks underneath that would lead to that function being carried out? And then you do another layer of analysis about what agents could do that task, right? So there might be multiple systems on board that could take care of a particular task that I have. It could be a human crew member, it could be an AI, it could be a robot of some sort. All of us might be able to accomplish something. The difference may be the precision, the accuracy, the time, the readiness. So, for example, we have in spaceflight, we do a crew readiness kind of training where every morning we kind of wake up and say, okay, what's the to-do list? And, hey, Jeff, this was on your docket, but you're telling me you've got a headache and I can take it over because I've been cross-trained. And so I'll do it today and then you can take on this task, right? We kind of, in real time, start to decide who's going to do what. That would, to me, hold for AI, automation, robotics as well, which means we have to design our systems and our schedules and our task load with that kind of flexibility to allow me to take over for you or the AI to take over for you. And so it's not a set it and forget it, right? Somewhere in that question, it's sort of like, is there human in the loop or isn't, right? I would say, let's look at the fact that we're putting AI into human workflows. What I think needs to shift is how we design human workflows to account for the fact that one of the agents or one or more of the agents could be a technology that then now needs to give us some flexibility in how we adapt to the changing conditions of the mission or our test goals. Does that make sense?
Yes. So and we're talking a lot about trust and how to build it and how to manage it. Are there any AI agents right now you'd say, I just not going to trust it. I wouldn't put this into my business.
I would say there's a lot more that I would want to redo some of the things on, but more often than not, I'm not a black or white sort of like, yes, I would always, or no, I would never. To me, it's very much of what, when, and where, right? What am I trying to do? Where do I need the assistance? And, and when is it appropriate to do that? And so what I'm taking the tact on when I look at all these different AI systems is I'll play with them and go, well, that was fun, but it took me actually longer than I think it would have taken if I did it myself. Or that was amazing. I'm so glad I did that. I'm going to let it do that from now on. And I'll just kind of stay back and do the higher level check. So it's again, not a one size fits all. I know that's a really annoying answer, but we really do have to go from what is the point of the task that you're trying to accomplish and all the way down to go, who is the best person or what is the best entity to take care of that. And I think where companies, think they're going to just like kind of plug in an AI and all of a sudden save 25% on their, cost for the year, get an efficiency number out of it. That's one way to do it. I'm not saying that you can't just plug an AI in and have it be useful and say, I'm going to trust it here, but I'm not going to trust it over here. Really, I think the better question is, what workflow do we need to redesign in order to utilize AI most effectively, right? And if you tell me that, I may never, for example, put AI in charge of my life support system on a spacecraft fully, right? I might always have some kind of a decision prompt, some kind of just give me my options, right?
Right.
We're still learning how to, kind of let the rope loose from mission control, right? Right now, mission control on the ground on Earth controls so much of our mission. We're trying to give the crew autonomy, let alone, computers take autonomy. So it's a little bit of a training wheels kind of process. But yeah, I could probably give you a list of things I like and don't like about them, but more it's the process that I go through to figure out where it's useful and where it's not.
I mean, it's a spectrum, right? I mean, you're always going to have a group. They don't trust AI. They're probably not going to trust them. Yep. There's a lot of people that are in the middle, and then you have some people that they're all in and they trust it. But that last part, though, is there something when people rush to trust AI, the system, what do you think they're getting consistently wrong about it?
I believe that one challenge for us as humans is that technology is evolving so much faster than we are, right? And we are trying to look at AI systems and equate it to something that we already have in our mental models about how it's supposed to be used and where we're supposed to put it. And in that rush to kind of just find the outcome benefit of it, first of all, you made a really good point, and that's why expectation is one of the 3 pillars of the trust framework, is because it matters so much, the expectation that the user brings to the interaction, right? So in that rush, what happens is people forget on both sides of the equation, whether it's the developer or the user, people forget that anytime a human interacts with a complex system, they are already starting with technical debt. What do I mean by that? The human in any of those systems as a user is already compensating for all of the errors, missteps, shortcomings, budget cuts, right, that happened in the years before as that was getting developed. So anytime there was an error in ideation or requirements writing or, say, development or machining or qual testing, right, the human is already compensating. And we love to look at data. So the data on the number of times where a pilot, say, in an aircraft has led to a catastrophic outcome where the pilot tried to intervene and couldn't help, right? We have data on that. That's often published, human error. We like to talk about that because we understand it, and it makes us feel better that we understand where the root of the problem was. What we're not looking at is the data that says there are a couple hundred times more than that when the pilot intervenes and saves the day, but we don't record that data often. So they are already always compensating. And so when we look at AI, and what we're getting wrong, I think, is that we're not recognizing that technical debt that we're starting with. So we expect that when ChatGPT went out, everybody kind of got it right away. Well, they didn't give us any training. They didn't tell us what it was for. They didn't give us the intent. They didn't share the biases. They didn't say, by the way, this is a positive affect system, and it's always going to try to agree with you unless you tell it not to. Like, we didn't benefit from any of that. So and that's why I keep pointing to the responsibility. There's responsibility on the part of the user, and there's responsibility on the part of the designer. So for example, my car pushes software updates to me, right? And it tells me a list of all the things that changed. Great. It's my responsibility to read that, because if I don't, and the car does something I don't expect, well, that's on me, because my mental model is out of date because I didn't bother to look to see what's changed about it. Thank goodness it gave me that transparency, but it doesn't always. And so that's why I think it's such a dance here. This is why I think that AI and human machine teaming is a communications problem, not really a technology problem.
I had this manager tell me this 25 years ago, still holds true. Yeah. The biggest obstacle of communication is the illusion that it's actually taking place.
Yep, absolutely right.
So, getting back to the humanoid robots, I mean, we're seeing the reports come out of China. We're seeing them running races and doing all these other things. And it's becoming pretty hot. And there's talk about, Elon Musk coming out with these things soon. You built them. What's real and what's hype? How close are we really to getting one in our homes?
I think we're pretty close, actually. I would say what's real and hype. It's an interesting way that you phrased it, because let me tell you a little story about the real part of that. So we, when we were building Robonaut, originally we had 2 joints in the neck. We had we called it the yes joint and the no joint. Okay. And later on, we were looking to see how we could extend its automated vision by giving it better angles of what it was trying to look for. So we said, we should add in like a maybe joint so that it could actually tilt and do a little, we called it the maybe joint because it was gonna maybe. So the way that we operated it initially, before we turned on full autonomy, was we had a teleoperator sitting somewhere adjacent, either in that room or in another room, right? Utilizing tech to operate the robot. And if you were behind the screen and you were the Wizard of Oz, I'd be like, hey, Jeff, hand me the wrench, okay? And if you were teleoperating it, you would look around and you would reach for the wrench and you'd hand it to me, and I got that. When we started to then have it do that autonomously, we would say, hey, Robonaut, hand me the wrench. And it would have to do a search pattern, and it would look for the tool and it would hand it to you and wait for you to tell it to release it. Because in space, you don't want to let things go unless you've got a grip on it or you're never going to get back. But when we did that, there was a time when there was a question that didn't understand the command. And when the human or the robot does this to you, it's like, oh, that's real. Like that feels very real. So the interactions with things that are human-like are incredibly real. And like I said, we bring a whole boatload of expectations to what that interaction is going to look like. So your robot vacuum that's, a disc that floats around on the floor, right? Doesn't feel as real as, a fully humanoid figure that's standing there handing you things or at your kitchen sink or doing home care. So I do think we're getting awfully close. And a lot of that is because the tech and the chipsets and the codes are so much more advanced than they were before, that the iterations are happening at a much faster pace. So they're learning so much faster about the dynamics, about the kinematics, about the interaction with the environment, which is ever changing. And that's one of the hardest parts of all this, is just the adaptation. So I think what we're going to find is, in a controlled set of environments, these are going to be very advanced. And then when you start to go outside the bounds of those envelopes, operating envelopes, we're going to find some really interesting and unplanned for failures. And that's when we have to kind of be on the lookout.
Very cool. So you co-founded an organization for space medicine and design. Mm-hmm. And as this realization comes to bear, where we're putting people and AI and space together, especially deep space. Mm-hmm. From a human perspective, though, what are we least ready for?
We are least ready for behavioral health and team cohesion. Those are our biggest risks to going into deep space. A lot of people think it's radiation. There's not untrue, but radiation is going to be there, and we will do the best we can, right? We don't have a food system that closes, for example. Some tech we have to develop there, meaning that something that can deliver nutrients over 5 years. Well, it's pre-planned and pre-positioned, and we're going to eat it on site and be nutritious and delicious and all of that. Those are technical challenges, sure. But to me, the biggest challenge and the highest risk we have is in understanding team dynamics. You're going to put 4 to 6 people in a very closed, isolated, confined container for years and take them off planet. And you're going to throw very real situations at them and very unplanned situations at them. And the ability to manage yourself as well as manage a team that can accomplish a goal is going to be really, really, very challenging. And I think, we're seeing AI come to use in areas of, therapy or mental health. That could be an interesting take on it. We've looked at all of that. We've looked at virtual windows. We've looked at AR, VR, holodecks, all the things that you can imagine. And as much as they could be an aid, they also could be an escapism technique. We've seen people in simulations that we run on Earth for these long duration missions. We've seen factions, we've seen abandonment, we've seen isolation, self-isolation. So that does, and that breaks the mission. We have to, kind of basically break the sim and come on out of it. So this is a problem we haven't solved. And it's going to be a very bumpy ride to do that, regardless of whether you have a mix of human and autonomous systems in there. It is quite the challenge. Yeah.
Yeah, very fascinating. So to close it out, what's the one thing that you're paying attention to right now that most people aren't?
I pay a lot of attention to coherence. I look at spaceflight systems, complex systems on Earth, regardless of the amount of humans versus the amount of tech that's in that system. I believe we're all hoping to build very sustainable and evolving systems. And sustainability to me doesn't mean fixed, right? It can absolutely evolve, but it needs to do so with coherence so that harmony is preserved between the humans and the tech that we're building together. So how do we live in harmony with technology? Right now, we're really racing to define what it means to be intelligent, and we're trying to figure out who's more or less intelligent, who's more or less capable, and there's so much fear that's coming into that equation. I would rather look at the really observed behavior of these systems and say, look, the smartest system in the world, I'll use smart in air quotes, smartest system in the world isn't very useful if it can't evolve while remaining understandable to the people that are working and living with it. So that coherence and the harmony of how we're developing and how we're evolving with technology is what I really pay almost all my attention to. And how do we design for that? And remember, it's all humans at the root of this, so we have to look no further than interactions with each other.
Love it. Dr. Jennifer Rochlis, thank you for being on Unscripted.
You're very welcome. Thanks so much for having me, Jeff.
Come back soon.
I will.